Make no mistake about it. Both times Donald Trump's been in office, he's had his Department of Justice and FBI turn a blind eye and willfully ignore investigations related to Epstein's Zorro Ranch, about 30 miles outside of Santa Fe, a ranch where some people have said there are dead bodies. There are people buried there, the result of fetish sex and sexual abuse, including of women. And the Trump administration, Department of Justice and FBI, starting in 2019, ended all investigations and actually ordered the state of New Mexico to stop investigating Zorro Ranch. Have you ever heard of such a thing? Unless you are a very good friend of a child sex trafficker like Donald Trump is, he has his Department of Justice, then led by Bill Barr, order the state to stop investigating and pull off the manpower about Zorro Ranch. Well, now we've got the breaking news that a special committee of the New Mexico legislature, bipartisan, and all of this headed by Attorney General Raul Torres, is issuing subpoenas in order, in their view, to create a complete documented record of the child sex trafficking ring and how it touched Zorro Ranch, something our federal government, controlled by Donald Trump, obviously has been unwilling to pursue. Let me read to you from the statement made by Raul Torres, the Attorney General, towards the survivor community. Here's what he said. To the survivors, your voices and your stories matter. What you choose to share and entrust with law enforcement in New Mexico will directly aid in this investigation, and we want to hear directly from you over the weeks and months ahead. And in particular, they're going to focus on subpoenaing federal agencies, including the Department of Justice and including the FBI and their own Santa Fe Department of Justice. I'm glad you're here on Legal AF to kick off our dozen or so fresh videos. Let's get into Zorro Ranch. There's been lots of reporting. Some of it has been done and chronicled by a reporter named Alyssa Valdez Rodriguez. Alyssa Valdez Rodriguez claims in the last week or so on her Substack that she has been the victim of a sonic weapon aimed at her from either a plane or a backpack-sized one, and that she has been suffering the illness and debilitating impacts ever since. She doesn't say who did it, but I think she's implying that it is the federal government. Remember, Donald Trump bragged about the use of a sonic weapon in Venezuela that left the guards around the dictator of Venezuela, that left the guards of Maduro bleeding from their ears and their eyes and unable to move. So of all the reporters doing all the stories, it's Alyssa Valdez Rodriguez that has been, in her view, attacked by a sonic weapon as she's trying to peel back the onion at Zorro Ranch. So kudos to the special committee formed in New Mexico to go after and get to the truth here. That's all people want. According to the Attorney General, this is what he had to say about the probe. We will name what happened. We will name who was responsible. And we will do so with the evidentiary regard that survivors deserve and that the law requires. That was actually Representative Andrea Reeb, a Republican, at a meeting at the New York, Mexico State Capitol. And she's one of 4 lawmakers on a commission. In fact, we have a clip about it right now. Let's play the clip.
Virginia was not only abused by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, she was trafficked to extremely wealthy, powerful, and dangerous individuals. Some of that trafficking happened right here in New Mexico at Zorro Ranch. That is not speculation. That is not rumor. That is testimony. And New Mexico now stands at crossroads. This state can either repeat the failures we have already witnessed across institutions and protected power over people, or New Mexico can lead. Lead with courage.
Also decided to issue these 14 subpoenas. Now, they're not to a specific person, but they are to entities like the estate of Jeffrey Epstein, the Department of Justice, the Department of Justice's offices in New Mexico, the Attorney General's office, multiple entities that they say could have played a role in this or did not do enough investigating. I can't remember if it was Sky or Amanda, but one of them talked about this meaningful separation between the state and the federal government, meaning that the state can get justice for survivors if the federal government is not going to. And we know these survivors have been let down time and time again by the federal government. And even if you just look at the way that the committee in D.C. is handling this, we heard an interview from Pam Bondi, or there was an interview with Pam Bondi last week. And yet, only one Republican showed up, and that was the chairman of the committee.
And leave it to the Department of Justice and FBI under Donald Trump to believe there's no story at Zorro Ranch. How do they know? There's references to it in the 3 million pages that were released under Todd Blanche and Pam Bondi. There's reporting that there are bodies buried there, and yet the Department of Justice turns a blind eye. Even James Comey, one of the MAGA who runs the Oversight Committee, was perplexed as to why the Zorro Ranch investigation was ended. Here's a clip.
Sounds pretty sick if what's been said about it's true. What are you hearing?
Well, I'm glad that the New Mexico authorities are going there and searching that property. I know that if no one searches the property, whenever this investigation is finally concluded, people are always going to have questions about whether or not there were deaths there, whether or not there were mysterious surgeries and things like that happening on the ranch. I don't know, but I do know this. The federal government asked New Mexico to stop their investigation, I believe back in 2019, of that ranch. So there's just so many questions about how the government failed the victims and how government failed in trying to prosecute Epstein sooner. I mean, this whole thing doesn't make sense. Everyone has conspiracy theories on, how Epstein was able to get away with it. Was it because he had, powerful friends?
Yeah.
Was it because he was an agent? No, we don't know, but we're going to find out. And I'm glad that they're on the ground now in New Mexico searching that property.
Congressman, you said in 2019 the government told New Mexico authorities to stand down investigating the ranch. Do you know what branch of the government?
It was the Department of Justice, I believe, and I believe it was because they I believe it perhaps was the Southern District of New York, because they had taken over the investigation at that point. So again, these are questions that we have. We want to get the answers, but I will say publicly, I'm glad that the New Mexico authorities are on the ground searching that property. I don't know if there's anything there. I don't think anybody knows, but I do know this, Jesse. It's probably never been searched before very thoroughly.
That's crazy.
The house probably has, but the property hasn't.
This needs to be picked up. And we've spoken often here on Legal AF about states and state attorneys general stepping in and doing the hard work to bring dignity to survivors and to bring justice, because our Department of Justice has been completely corrupted. Can't count on the Civil Rights Division to do anything but go after Donald Trump's perceived political enemies. And they seem to relish doing that. But who's there for the survivors? We keep talking about the formation of a weaponization fund to give Jan Sixers and others money because the Biden administration went after them. Where's the fund for the survivors of Epstein, for the more than 1,400 survivors? Because the Department of Justice and FBI let them down, whether it was in 2019 to stop the search at Zorro Ranch or rejecting Annie Farmer, a teenager who made a report about being solicited for sex by a guy named Jeffrey Epstein, which was completely ignored by the Miami field office of the FBI and otherwise. Why aren't we compensating the victims? So when I hear that New Mexico found a way to put aside partisan rancor, join together, and under the leadership of its attorney general, come up with a way to chronicle and document the child sex trafficking ring, shouldn't we all celebrate that? See, that's the one thing that cuts across party lines. America doesn't like a child sex trafficker. America doesn't like anyone who covers up for a child sex trafficker. America doesn't like anyone who can't explain why they're covering up for a child sex trafficker. Donald Trump has at his disposal all the tools necessary to break the case, right? And yet he purposely doesn't do it. Says there's no story there, tells his FBI and Department of Justice to not release files unless ultimately compelled to do so by the American people and the hue and cry for justice for the survivors. So we're going to continue to follow the Epstein story the way we always have. We've had Danny Bensky on the show, an Epstein survivor. We've had Lisa Phillips on the show, an Epstein survivor, regularly. Talk about their dignity, their authentic story, and they're not going to rest until they obtain dignity and justice, and we aren't either here on Legal AF. I'm glad you're here. Hit the free subscribe button. Help us to continue to grow this pro-democracy channel. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.
Joining me now is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. He sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He never holds back. He is always speaking his mind. I'm so glad that you can be here with me. There's so much to talk about. I just want to start with this because this happened in the last hour. In just the last hour or so, Republican Senator Bill Cassidy, he's in the YOLO caucus, as I'm calling it, ripped the president's slush fund on Twitter and said, quote, if there needs to be a settlement, the administration should bring it to Congress to decide. I wonder if, I'm sure you'd love that, but I wonder if you think he has pissed off enough Republicans that could actually happen.
Not quite. I think that there's still some primaries out there that give Trump leverage. And I think the collapse of his presidency and his way of thinking and the economic pain that he's inflicted on regular American families, all of those things are building up to what I call the blazing saddles moment, where the governor says to all the cronies around him, boys, it's time we looked out for our own phony baloney jobs. Mm-hmm. And I do think that looking out for their own phony baloney jobs is going to start to become very real for a lot of Republicans who until now have had spines of foam.
Now, we're starting to see that to some degree. Even with, I like to think they did it for the moral reasons, but even in some Republican senators flipping on the war powers vote, I'm not naive to think it was all for moral reasons. There were some political reasons there for sure. We saw what Brian Fitzpatrick said in the hallway today. On the slush fund, I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but let's say it built up to there being a point where there was support among enough Republicans to do something. What would that look like to stop it at this point?
It's hard to tell because they've been so supine for so long that there's not really a portfolio of resistance options on the Republican side. I think the closest you come is Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, right? Which blew up because a whole lot of Republicans quietly called the White House and Susie Wiles said, no, stop this. This is really, really stupid and we got to kill it. But since then, they've just been rolled and rolled and rolled and rolled and rolled for probably the worst cabinet ever, all confirmed. And these appalling decisions like the $1 billion ballroom and the $1.8 billion cop beaters slush fund and this crazy war in Iran that has no end. So the pressure is really, really building hard against them, but it is hard to figure out how it's going to manifest. I think bit by bit, you're going to see more and more people, whether to protect their own phony baloney jobs or because they've had a late-come crisis of conscience, begin to push back a little bit.
Go figure, they don't think an IRS slush fund is going to be really good in their campaign ads, political geniuses. Let me ask you about the ballroom. This feels a little bit different, or you tell me, because It seems to be at this moment that the funding is not currently in the Senate bill, or that's what the reporting suggests. There's a range of reporting suggesting as to why. Some of it is unhappiness around the Paxton endorsement. It seems like it's obviously a politically stupid thing for anyone to be forced to support. Give us a sense of why it was stripped out. Do you think it stays out? Is there any path forward for Republicans to push it forward?
Yeah, I think in the Senate, there is not interest in getting this ballroom done. They hate the idea. They wish it would go away. It is terrible optics as they go into the election and people are worried about grocery prices and fuel prices. So it's really a huge burden on Republicans right now trying to stagger their way towards the November election. But it followed relatively normal process. They used reconciliation. We've used reconciliation before. They tried to come to Congress. They came to Congress before. The kind of general funding rules of the Congress were being followed. You move over to this, you've got a fund that's set up with what money? Nothing appropriated for it. How was it decided? Who were the adverse parties in the litigation in Trump versus Trump? Who was Blanche representing when he alone signed the so-called settlement document? What makes it a settlement when you didn't have adverse parties in the first place? And then right behind all that just awful stuff come all these thugs who attacked the Capitol, who beat our Capitol police officers. And they're all like saying the quiet part out loud. Yeah, this is for us. This is our cop beaters slush fund. And that makes it really hard, I think, for the Republicans. It's one step worse on procedure, and these January 6th thugs just celebrating this so visibly, so publicly. It totally quiet part out loud.
I just read only a sampling of it, but it is, this is not even that old. It is so horrifying to kind of hear. I mean, what we've talked about corruption in this administration. It's mind-blowing. And sometimes it can be, and you do this for a living among many other things, hard to wrap your head around. I hear this from a lot of people. When you're out there talking to your constituents or explaining to people the case for why the corruption happening in this administration is impacting their lives, give us a sense of how you make the political argument.
Well, the political argument is really simple. People are suffering economically. Their costs have gone way up, whether it's groceries or home insurance or the gas at the pump. And they have a president who came into office promising that costs would go down right away, that he was there to bust things up and make things better for them against a rigged system. And now they're seeing that he's playing the rigged system for himself. He's got the kids with the billion-dollar crypto deals. He's got pardons for sale. Everywhere you turn, the donors for the billion-dollar ballroom, and now this $1.8 billion cop beaters slush fund. All of that is super visible, and it's totally not looking out for me. And it's that lack of regard and interest for regular people that his really unbelievable comment captured, that he doesn't give a thought about Americans' financial situations. That just, the wincing on the Republican side when that comment went up on the TV was just like, that hurt.
And J.D. Vance said it was out of context. We know the truth there. And Trump, he's become the swamp monster, essentially sitting on top of the rigged system he created. Okay, you've been so generous. We're going to have you stay here. We've got to do a commercial. You know how this works. When we get back, and I want to ask you about one man who you've talked about in the past. His name is Jeff Bezos. I don't know if you saw his CNBC interview this morning. You may have seen it.
I've read the excerpts from it.
Well, in case anybody watching has not seen it, I just want to play one clip of that. We'll take a break and we'll talk about that when we come back.
I think he is a more mature, more disciplined version of himself than he was in his first term. Trump has lots of good ideas, and he's been right about a lot of things. You have to give him credit where credit is due.
Okay, back with me now is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Okay, as I mentioned this, a few years ago, and you track this so closely, a few years ago, ProPublica published an investigation showing how in 2007 and 2011, Jeff Bezos did not pay a single penny in federal income taxes. Other billionaires also do the same. It's not a one-off. You've raised this issue many times. What is the solution, and how central do you think an argument about this is right now in our political space?
Well, I think it's really important because part of the anger that people feel out there is the feeling that the system is rigged. And that same study that you referenced showed, if I recall correctly, that Jeff Bezos paid a 1% tax rate over many years. And so you're right. If you double 1% to 2%, is that going to save everything? No. But if you move to a world in which billionaires pay the same tax rates as the teacher in Queens, as the plumber, then suddenly parks get better and schools get better. And you can have a more robust world for people at the lower end of the spectrum. And so the idea that a billionaire thinks that it's about him and him paying more in taxes, when what it's really about is America, and what kind of an America do we have when the people who have the most, for whom their last marginal dollar has literally zero value, they don't even know where it is, and they avoid the tax system, don't pay taxes, duck out on their responsibilities to fund the government, and then everybody else has to pick up the slack. And that's wrong from a tax perspective, but it's really wrong from a democracy and morality perspective. And I think that helps explain why people are so darned angry. And by the way, it's not every billionaire. Tom Steyer's out there working his tail off to become governor of California to fight the fossil fuel industry and fix the climate havoc we have coming at us. But this attitude is not for real.
Before the break, I played another clip from the CNBC interview, a soundbite of Bezos saying, and I just want to get this right, he called Trump, quote, a more mature, more disciplined version of himself than he was in his first term. Trump has lots of good ideas. He's been right about a lot of things. You have to give him credit where credit is due. What do you think about that?
He doesn't see the Donald Trump that I see. I don't know what Donald Trump he's seeing, but the one with the billionaire ballroom, the one with the cop beater slush fund, the one with the side deals for his family, the one who just gave himself tax amnesty for himself, his family, and all of his companies. There's nothing normal about that. That's not stable. In fact, it's downright evil.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you for being here with me
Thank
tonight.
you.
For anyone still worried that the justices on the nation's highest court were still not taking concerns that they are ethically compromised seriously, after scandal rocked the court, those fears might actually be getting worse over the last 48 hours. That is because instead of demonstrating to the public that they are taking ethics issues and lapses seriously, two justices failed to file their ethics disclosures by today's 1 p.m. deadline. And they are Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who has asked for more time to file his annual financial disclosures following criticism that he failed to report luxury travel and real estate transactions with Texas billionaire and Republican donor Harlan Crow, and Justice Samuel Alito, who also delayed his disclosure this year. It comes on the heels of statements by Harlan Crow's attorney in a letter to the Senate Judiciary Committee after the committee requested Crow's testimony, arguing that Congress does not have the power to supervise the ethics of the court. He writes this, quote, to reiterate, Congress does not have the power to impose ethics standards on the Supreme Court. It therefore cannot mount an investigation for the purpose of helping craft such standards. Finally, because the committee has requested information about the leadership of a co-equal branch of government implicating sensitive separation of powers considerations, it must satisfy a higher standard in order to establish a valid legislative purpose for seeking the requested information. On this point, too, the committee's investigation comes up short. In a statement, Senate Judiciary Chair Dick Durbin and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse respond this way, quote, Harlan Crow does not call the shots here. He is not a branch, nor even a member of government, and cannot claim the protections and privileges of one. The Senate Judiciary Committee has clearly established oversight and legislative authority to assess and address the ethical crisis facing the court. all options are on the table moving forward. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse joins us. Senator, I'm glad that the both of you responded in a letter. You read it, and it's not clear if it's audacity or arrogance or ignorance that fuels such words to be put in writing by lawyers representing Harlan Crow. Do you have a theory on the case?
Any one of those would suffice. I think the fact that any one of them could be true and all three might be is pretty clearly demonstrated by the fact that in the last round of Harlan Crow gifts to Justice Thomas, the question was referred to the Judicial Conference, which then applied a law to make a determination. So what we're doing here as a Congress is to look at how a body established by Congress, the Judicial Conference, implements a law passed by Congress, the Ethics in Government Act. How you can find a separation of powers violation in Congress doing that is a highly imaginative legal act.
Senator, what, if any, information has been revealed or back-channeled, if that even exists, about this delay in filing these ethics reports? It seems that an optimistic and starry-eyed person might think maybe they're finally coming clean, but that certainly hasn't been the pattern or practice.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, the extensions themselves are not the problem. The question is what gets disclosed at the end of the day. And if you're looking at Justice Thomas, he has gone on a long binge of non-disclosure. And now he's got quite a lot of cleaning up to do. And I think he and his lawyers have some interesting questions to ask about what they disclose. They've said they'd update after the latest Judicial Conference correction that was sent to the Supreme Court. That happened in March. So do they disclose what's happened since March? Or do they disclose the full reporting year that they're obliged to? Or does he go back and correct all his previous forms to comply with the correct standard? And I think they're trying to sort their way through all of that. I hope that he's very transparent and he updates all his previous forms and corrects them to comport with the correct judicial standard.
Senator, the investigative reporting that gave us as a public the information about the hidden real estate transactions and the hidden tuition paid to Justice Thomas's dependents, it's documents work. It's indisputable. What is the investigative ambition of the committee in terms of understanding more than just what the documents reveal? And by that, I mean, would you like an investigation that goes into the relationship and other interests? I mean, what else would you like to know?
Well, we're still developing the investigative plan. But for instance, the Finance Committee of the Senate has an extremely legitimate interest in trying to understand the tax ramifications of all of this. In theory, you should file a gift tax form if you're gifting more than $17,000 to someone. And these vacations to Justice Thomas were certainly worth many times that. So what was the reporting? Why did they feel they needed to report or not report? There's a whole tax side to this. Was it disclosed as income? How was it treated? All of those questions are highly relevant to proper understanding of the tax code and to the Finance Committee's business. On the Judiciary Committee side, it's more about the operation of the influence machine that Harlan Crow is a part of, and exactly how many benefits he gave to Justice Thomas and his family. The fact that we have documents about paying his adoptive son, if you will, tuition, paying his mother's rent, paying money indirectly to his wife, and paying for his very expensive multiple vacations doesn't mean that that's all that he paid for. Mm-hmm. So that's what we've asked for these documents about. What else? What other transactions took place between Harlan Crow and Justice Thomas? At the end of the day, another character named Leonard Leo figures into this, who has a contract with Justice Thomas to sell his book, creating revenues personally for Justice Thomas, while he's also filing briefs at the Supreme Court through fictitious named front groups, while he spent millions of anonymously raised dollars to campaign for the confirmation of Justice Thomas's new 6 Republican majority.
It just feels like every rock that is turned over is more evidence that real oversight would actually benefit the court and its reputation with the American public, which is plunging. It doesn't have much farther to go. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you very much for jumping on and spending some time with us on this today.